Greetings, everyone. Glad to have you with us. We've got Eric Sapp ready to go in just a moment. Eric, glad to have you with us.
I'm excited to be here.
Good to see you. In 2 weeks, we have Ted Zoller from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, Keenan Flagler School of Business, and the Keenan School of Entrepreneurship joining us to talk about social and support networks for entrepreneurs. So that is coming up this week on Wednesday. Vint, I see you're with us. Delighted to have you. I know that at 11 o'clock on Wednesday, we have a Marconi event that Maylin made everyone aware of. Do you want to say a few words about that 11 o'clock event? You're on mute, sir.
Thank you. Actually, I need to go and look. There are so many of these events. I don't remember which one this one is. Hang on one second. Come back to it.
Okay. I'll also say that an hour later at noon, there's a joint Atlantic Council and PCI event going through the findings of the Geotech Commission report. So I'll be co-hosting that with David Bray. Vint, it was our understanding that it was a Marconi event starting at 11 o'clock Eastern time.
Oh, yes, correct. I found it. The problem is I have 4 Marconi events next week, and so I can remember which one it was. This one is focusing on, it's called the Decade of Digital Inclusion. We're looking at the 10-year period from now until around 2030. And this particular session, it starts out with optical fiber because the lead is David Payne, the guy that invented erbium doped fiber, but we'll be looking at issues that keep us awake at night. So the agenda is broader than just the technology of optical fiber, but that's where we start. Connectivity is a big issue. And then after that, the questions that PCI asks itself and its members, what else besides connectivity do we have to worry about in order to make the internet a useful tool? Mm-hmm. So it'll be a broad discussion, and of course, everyone is welcome to join.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for letting us and inviting us to join. Ben, greatly appreciate it. So with those announcements, let me introduce Eric Sapp. Eric's an entrepreneur, a faith leader, a political advisor. He's joining us from just outside of the DC area today. He spent his career supporting communities all over the world in their efforts to promote the common good. In recent years, he's become a nationally recognized leader in the Data for Good movement and helped pioneer breakthroughs in empathy-based machine learning and more meaningful AI. I'll let him say more about his background and the journey that he's on. Eric, we're glad to have you with us. Eric, you're on mute. Eric, we can't hear you yet. Eric, we can't hear you.
There we go. Sorry. I started to share screen before I'd unmuted myself, and my unmute button went away. But it is. I'm happy to be here with everybody to talk about how easy it is to use technology and data for good. And Scott has started off with one of the classic pitfalls here. But just to kind of jump into it for the sake of time. What I want to do is talk through, start with a couple of these basic principles. And then a lot of what I'm going to be talking about and the perspective I bring, I've realized kind of you need to understand my story, because how I have traveled through this space has greatly informed what I see and what we do. So I'll take a little bit of time to share my story and the things I've learned. We'll touch on some of the basic principles and the overlay, and then because I found it's often easier to apply principles when you've got a little meat on the bones, I'll run through a series of case studies and examples and illustrations of how our group at Public Democracy has been doing them. And I think I can do all of that in a half hour. That may mean speeding through a few of the final case studies, but then we'll take as much time as we can for Q&A. So I'm excited to be here and looking forward to this conversation. Start here with just these basic principles. And as we kind of talk about data for good more broadly, how data can be applied correctly, a couple key things that I found that I think is important is, as we talk about all of this, and you'll see in kind of everything that I illustrate, there is this, hey, we're using this for the people. And especially our work at Public Democracy focuses on looking for holes in the data, and particularly how we can build data for undervalued communities. And there can be a tendency to say, think of this in terms of charity. I mean, it is do-goody sort of things that, we do this, and there's a trade-off somehow between profitability or between kind of success and this. And to me, one of the most exciting things about data is we cannot and should not accept that trade-off. That doesn't mean we keep doing things the same way we do and they will just be more profitable this way. But at one of the most fundamental levels, I'd say, kind of just looking at this in economic terms, injustice is inefficient. And what data is given us a new avenue to is the understanding, whether it's insurtech or some of the things we're going to talk about in market understandings or politics, to much better understand where those injustices and inequalities are. And just fundamentally to our old school economic models, identifying those inefficiencies is a way to make systems work better. It is a way for the entire economy, political sphere, society to improve. And so we should not accept this idea that the good stuff is just what we give away after we make all the money using data to direct people. Second point, and I'll go into this a little bit more later, is data is a unique asset. Our entire economy basically is based on scarcity as our form of measurement. All of our asset classes, gold, money, things we have, assume scarcity. And data is unique in that it is kind of the first asset in human history that the more you use it, the more valuable it becomes. The more it is combined, the more valuable it becomes. And that creates very powerful tools and new opportunities for us. Third is, this is going to be my theme throughout, we need to rethink how and what data is. People are not users. They are not data points. They are not our market. They are data creators. They are the co-collaborators on anything we do. As I'll say again later, everything that Public Democracy does in big data, we never find anything in big data. All the case studies that I show you, whether it was breakthrough on opioids, veterans, COVID, we never found that ourselves. And this is somewhat of a semantic point, but it makes all the difference. We followed people in the things they found. I mean, if you think for a second, there is really nothing in behavioral data that can be anything but what someone else has already discovered. And that shift in mindset, again, is a very important shift, and it creates, I think, moral and ethical implications on how this should be used. But it also, if I'm looking at this and saying, people have already done this, they've already discovered this, instead of, ooh, hey, I've got an audience segment that can direct people to this thing that I want. It just, again, is a different piece. And then for me, as I'll say and move into my story, we are answering and solving for some of the most fundamental questions in our society. And my story begins, I'm a pastor. I went to divinity school. That's Duke Div over there on the left. And so everything that I do and what I'll be talking about today, for me, I see as ministry and other service. And I believe my purpose in this world is to serve God and serve my neighbor. And so take that as the context for everything that follows. Now, my story took an interesting path. Yesterday was very significant to me. I did a joint degree, a Master of Divinity, a Master of Public Policy. I spent 3 years working at the Pentagon and left the wing of the Pentagon that was hit 2 weeks before 9/11, where I'd been working for the Undersecretary in SOLIC, Special Ops, Low Intensity Conflict. Applying these things in different ways. Back before 9/11, our Special Operations Forces were the only force in the world that could deploy anywhere in 24 hours. And so there was actually a massive humanitarian component to what our Special Forces did. I went from there to work on the Hill, on Senate Health Committee, Senator Kennedy. That bottom picture was the picture we took after passing the Medicare expansion Part B bill, and I'd floor staffed that. So those kind of 3 different experiences then informed a lot of what came after. I left the Hill to then run what became, I ran, again, the quick version, worked on the 2004 election, first time I'd worked in politics, got the election bug. I was working in North Carolina where I'd gone to divinity school, and that was the year of the God Gap election, where the best indicator someone would vote for Bush was not that they were a Republican, but that they went to church on a weekly basis. I knew those people, I was organizing with those people as a Christian. I felt that was harmful to the witness. And as a Democrat, I saw the problems we were doing. And in my mid-late 20s, decided, I was young enough to think I could do something about it. So left the Hill and started the first firm that worked with Democrats on faith outreach. And this is the beginning of what leads to data. This was, some of you may remember, what's the matter with Kansas? Well, there was nothing the matter with Kansas. We won Kansas. The next year after that book was written, I ran the program for Governor Sebelius. We showed up and we realized that, and I remember I talked about this actually with Senator Kennedy. That book came out and the basic premise, as you remember it, was why are these people in Kansas so stupid as to vote against their economic interest? If only they understood how much better Democrats were, they wouldn't be so dumb. And Senator Kennedy, the richest senator at that time, said, well, there's nothing stupid or wrong with these people voting for what they believe is right and a willingness to put their selfish self-interest behind their moral beliefs. That's something we should aspire to. The problem was Democrats were not speaking to any of those people. And so once we did in 2006, Casey with Santorum, Strickland in Ohio had given Bush the vote on the back of the presidency on the back of the evangelical vote. 2 years later, Ted Strickland won the evangelical vote in Ohio. Granholm beat DeVos. Casey beat Strickland. We won a number of congressional races. And having done it, we did it just by showing up. And a big difference was the programs I ran, and this was hard to push through, but Democrats were so desperate, was we did not talk, we listened. This is going to be a key point in data. By 2008, I led the Red to Blue program for Democrats in the country. These are the states that had faith outreach programs with paid staff. They were all people that had come, most of them were people who come out of our 2006 work that then we were able to place. John Green of the Pew Forum said after the 2008 election, when Democrats had filibuster-proof majorities, the White House, Senate, House, et cetera, that if Democrats continued to do this work, we would see historic shifts in behavior. The work, again, was entirely based on showing up, listening, speaking into the spaces in ways that showed people we understood what mattered to them. This is just another map showing all the pickups. This is what happened in 2 years when we did that. And then we stopped. By 2010, you remember that last map? This is the number of states the Obama for America people came into office, we'd won history. Therefore, we didn't need to speak to those people anymore. They fired every single one of the faith outreach directors, ended all of those programs. The only one that was left was in Michigan, where Mark Brewer, the state chair, who was our very first client for out of his own space, hired that. In 2010, the DTRIP, Democrat Congressional Campaign Committee, told all of the people who'd been elected in 08, if they ran the same type of, the data was showing us, if we spoke to the same people that we had before, if people did the same type of campaign they had in 08, that was guaranteed. That would show those campaigns were not sophisticated enough to understand this new data-driven strategy, and therefore they would get no national funding. And the result, like we all know history, the result was stark. In 2008, I had 67 personal cell phones of governors, senators, and Congress people that we had worked directly with in my contacts. By 2014, the number who were still in office was 4. The next 8 years oversaw the largest loss in over a century by any major American party. And so this, again, why you need to understand my story is this was kind of my beginning of my career. This was as I was learning, getting involved, et cetera. Our mission had always been align what's right with what works. I'd bang my head against the party infrastructure on, why are we doing this? Like, your data shows those people, the number of meetings in 9 and 10 where those people would never vote for us. Like, we're all in office because those people did. Yeah, but the data shows they never will. And it was like, well, there's something missing in the data, but the data was drawing decisions. And so we shifted, and I said, well, I can only argue this. We need to start creating data. And our firm is now built, talk about it in a second, what's become the largest psychometric data set in America on the core values that motivate people to commit and engage in the world. And it also started then raising key questions for us on what data is and how we use it. And so most fundamentally, as we get to where we are now, I'll fill in the 12 years gap in the middle of that with the case studies. But what I think the questions we face at this moment is, will our data be used to serve or to direct? And perhaps that's the most fundamental one. It goes back to my kind of faith question as well. It's constant tension when there's power, when there's things that matter most. Will those be used to serve people or to direct them? Whether it's the faith, history and faith, whether it's history and politics, government, et cetera. The other big question, and I'm giving this in terms of politics, but it applies to everything in use of data. Are we going to look at data in a 50+1 strategy? This was always the problem, is Democrats were looking, what's our data show us to get to 50+1, 50% plus 1? That's how you win. That's all about me. How do I get, as a leader, as a party, to a point, all I've got to do is get to 50+1 and I've won, that's my goal. Martin Luther King, when asked, how are you such a great leader, said, I don't lead, I just watch where the people are going and I follow. And that is, I think, the big question right now. And again, King was a pretty darn good leader because he did that. Where we're working right now, after some time in the wilderness in the party, we're Stacey Abrams' primary data digital group. And as I'll discuss, we've seen some just kind of incredible things with COVID that has even kind of shaped some of the White House policy on that. So a few other principles. I use this slide when I'm talking to NGOs that we work with. Are we going to use, people think of data, they think of lists. We go back to our old strategy of what's my list? What's my membership line? What's my data? And so much we think of data in terms of the caged canary. How do I get my people to sing for me when I want them to? What's happened now with behavioral understanding, and whether it's again advocacy, customer base, government, pick your application, is We have an ability to, if we can provide things that matter and are valuable and important to people, if we answer their questions, they flock to us because we are meeting a need. And just to kind of beat that analogy to death, if I have canaries in a cage, I have to feed them every day just to make sure they'll sing for me and show up in the morning. If one of them gets sick and dies, like I got to go find and buy another one. You know, all these things. This put out the bird feeder, they come. Heck, if half of those birds got eaten by a cat, the others would show back up. This is such a better model for engaging and meeting because it is based on what do these birds need that I would like to have around. Also in the digital space, we have new technologies and opportunities. Ads, again, if we think in old school's idea of what an ad is, oh, it's Mad Men. It's what's this message I'm going to put up? If I do a banner, what's the one thing I need to say in this piece? Oh, now I've only got 12 words. I got to really dumb it down. And with digital technology, ads can be a conversation. We can learn what people are reading, what the pathways that led them to that point. We can speak into those, not with do this to me, but just informational pieces. We can see how different people respond, follow up with different conversations, and wait until the end to ask them to do stuff for us. Finally, we need to really rethink how we are thinking about and using data. Most of data that is built today is in this left side of the attention metrics. That is how we are building data. The AI that shapes so much of our world and who we are, what we see, and how we experience the world, our communities, our environments, is learning about who people are from data based on that left side of the chart. What we've done at Public Democracy, and I can tell you as a result, data that works much better, is data that measures commitment. It measures what people truly care about. It tries to understand them instead of saying, how can we get their eyeballs? And the big breakthrough for me, this is both story and transition to case studies, was in 2016, I think. We were running a huge national campaign on environmental issues, creation care. And I was watching our chart, I was watching our dashboard at 11 o'clock at night. And there were 2 million people around the country, this map was all lighting up, 2 million people around the country who in that moment were engaging with something I'd written 2 weeks ago. And I had this very spiritual, emotional kind of realization that in that moment, this thing was that was the focus of their attention. And I knew what was happening on our data. I knew all those people were being tagged. I knew we were connecting that to key values that matter to them. I knew all the ones and zeros, and I realized what we had with our data was not ones and zeros. It wasn't a better way to sell people into the market. We were collecting this repository of hope, of intent, of human connection. We were building something that was nigh on to sacred. We were seeing people, so much of what is out there is the Instagram version of what people see. In our work, I see people after that when they're curled up on the bathroom floor crying. And there's a great deal of responsibility that comes with that. There is an ability to abuse that, but there is also incredible power to democratize that application and to meet people who, if there is one way to describe the internet right now, Twitter, think about it. It is a bunch of people crying out into the void, do I matter? Is anybody listening? And so that's an indictment on the church, because that should be something that we're answering. But this is what a lot of the data is collecting, and what's so tragic about it is going back to that attention metric. Most of how it's being used to say, yes, you matter. You should buy a Coke. Yes, we're listening. Can you believe how bad Trump was? And that's why our system's breaking. So I'll move through. We did with crowdsourcing. Again, everything in big data is not to this directed or served. It is about, like, this is my bees analogy, like I'm a beekeeper, is you just follow the way bees work. Is like one bee goes, finds the flower, it comes back, does its little butt shaking dance, directs the others on how to fly to the sun. And they map out all these paths to where the value is. People are doing this all the time in big data. Everything in big data follows people. And so just simple efficiency, if we understand and use it that way, it should work better. Data, again, is an abundance resource. We did a long white paper on how to apply these principles to, from that data insight I had, how do I create a way for people to share in the value of their data? Because to me, economically, that's the big next step. The Sophia there was also understanding data. This is our Cambio model. The cathedral in Florence was built. The architect that built it created it for this giant dome that was impossible to build when they started construction. But he knew it would take them 100 years to get to the point where they could put it on. And he believed that someone would have figured out the solution by then. So part of what we need to do as we look to how this can be applied is both focus on change shifts systems on what we can do now, and also look to the future of, we need to be building the foundational pieces so that as systems continue to get stronger, as AI improves, we have these better pieces in place that can take advantage of what the future brings. Now I'm going to run through some quick case studies. All those big principles, here's different ways we've applied it. We've used big data to shut down trafficking. We worked with prosecutors where they knew a few places, a few hotels being used as brothels. They were trying to bring case against hotels that women were being trafficked into, but they didn't have enough way to stake it out. Women didn't want to talk. It was too big of a problem. So we looked at the hotels they knew. We created competitor analyses on the audiences going to them, all the factors that basically used marketing to say, hey, I want to run an ad to people that go to these hotels. What are other places I might want to look? We found those other places. We geo-marked, tagged those other places. We ran our bots through back channel to scrape the phone numbers of the women in the ads that were being trafficked. And then we use simple marketing technology to say, I'm going to put a geotag on all these potential competitors, and I want to know when my audience segment comes into that space. And so we found when those cell phones that were tied in ads selling women for sex showed up and passed through these different hotels, created an immediate kind of mechanism for prosecutors to move forward. We worked with the census on developing better understanding for undervalued communities last in 2019 and 2020. If you are poor and living in America, the market doesn't care about you. And we looked at urban areas, but it matters for urban areas and rural. If you want to understand why disinformation, why influence operations by foreign and domestic actors are so successful, it's because of undervalued communities. And when we put a political lens on it, we think of those stupid, as Democrat, those backwards, racist, whatever, rural white folks, and those super spreaders in states that they never get vaccinated. But the real reality in the data is it is two parts of the same whole, that the folks in rural areas and the folks in urban are both being undervalued the same way. In Texas and Florida, dirty little secret, as we look at the huge explosions of Delta and everything there and unvaccinated, the largest growth has been in Black and Hispanic communities. There's a lot more whites who are vaccinated in Florida and Texas than there as a share of population than Blacks and Hispanics. But we put our simple little field lenses on. We decide what we think we know about people. And then we just start turning our back on these undervalued communities. In the census, we focused on how do you build value around these communities. If the problem is that there's not data, let's build it. And if you want investment to prevent gentrification, I believe power and money tend to win out. We should flag when it's wrong. We should flag when it's abusive. We should try to create regulations that bend things the right way. But the best way to solve for these problems is make it in the interest of the powerful and the wealthy to do what the people need. And so we did that by building data. You want to invest in these areas? You know what's not going to work? Building a grocery store. You might see them as a field, as a desert, as a food desert. You might want to build a big high-rise for them. These people can't use that, because if you looked at data at the time, you would have seen this was the best data, the strongest data in Birmingham was, look at all the people I could find for predatory lending. So if I'm looking at a market, this is what I see. This is how algorithms, AI understand these communities. They're payday lending targets. One of the other biggest filters. In these areas, 93% of children were in single parent households. Both these are problem. This is a problem. This is something that now, woke racists on the coast get to decide. We need to come in and save. We need to fix this. Or if you're an investor, I better be careful about that, because this is a problem area. What we found, though, was there was much deeper, stronger data. Those single moms, when we looked at where they were spending their time, the top source of content they were consuming was parenting resources. You looked at the rich white people in Birmingham, that wasn't even in the top 40. Those parents were desperately looking for how to be better parents. They were looking for childcare options. They were looking for opportunities to help their kids get ahead. And that is a huge market opportunity. And so it shifted how the investment went into Birmingham. It shifted how the centers were being set up. It shifted how the marketplaces were being set up. Rich white people like us, my Wegmans has 2-hour daycare. A lot of our gyms will give you like 4 hours of free daycare to go to the gym. The ability to set up those services and start to jumpstart economies was huge in Birmingham, and it's playing out. I'm going to just skip through quick now to hit my 5 minutes left. We recruited all the initial cases in the lawsuit against Monsanto over Roundup, going in with the same piece. This was our first big movement from PII-based data into anonymized data, which is now most of how we engage. And what we found, a kind of simple example from this one, after applying tons of filters to the data that was out there in the marketing, we allowed the AI systems to optimize our ads, and found that the best ad to show was someone who was most likely to call and join the case was someone that had that lived in a zip code with high glyphosate concentrations, that's carcinogen in Roundup. They fit all of our modeling on likely non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. They were engaging in content that indicated they were thinking about these terms, and their phone was traveling at a constant rate of speed on something not marked as a road on Google Maps. So mathematically, the computer had found the farmer in their tractor. And that was so important because those people were by themselves. Their tractor's running on GPS. They knew they had 45 minutes alone. They're watching their workers spray Roundup in the fields. Their wife may have been diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's a few months ago. And in that moment, they were ready to join. Moment-based engagement is how we connect with people. It's how we follow and understand them. We are all different people at different moments in our day. I am different now with you all than I am when my kids come home and run up and hug me, than I am tired in the evenings. We need to understand people in that way. We built what we can now find more Iraq war veterans than the VA. And we built a massive trust funnel, which was the first ever to create an online mechanism that tens of thousands of veterans trusted enough. The top symptom of intense PTSD is intense paranoia. And we created an online funnel where these people trusted us enough that they would turn over their social security number, their medical records, and for the first time in many of their lives, tell the story of what had happened in their attack. We did it all through understanding it. In Q&A, I could take the longer. That was one of the most meaningful and challenging experiences of my life, but it was one that taught us a great deal. We were working on opioids before COVID. We were able to track people back and identify risk behaviors months before they entered the system as an opioid addict. All of our opioids data right now is basically built out of cop cars and emergency rooms. We don't know things about opioids until people enter the system. And so we looked at their behavior to see what are the things that indicate someone is going to enter into these risk categories. And through that, we were able to identify Adderall as a key risk factor to opioids. It hadn't been identified in the literature yet. As soon as we did, all this time, just like, of course, it is triggering the exact same mechanism that opioids does. 10% of American children are on Adderall. If you had this in your system, opioids chemically are very similar to a hug. It's almost the exact same chemical reaction. And Adderall jacks that up. So of course the child who's on Adderall would be more likely and susceptible to become addicted. We also then were able to shift how police and others engaged in opioids. We were working on that when COVID hit. We repurposed all those same models, saying there is going to be something in the data that shows us who's sick from COVID in January of 2020. We applied new filters, new layers, and in March of 2020, we identified all of the COVID outbreaks before the first test came in. We were the first group to publish on loss of smell as a symptom of COVID because we saw it in the data. That's this, if you see it over here. This is loss of smell in America. And this, after we started looking at it, when we ran that analysis, this was loss of smell in March. Like, you want to guess what else was happening there in March? This last one was looking at how we built those models. This was Seattle. These were other states. Final application, and this will wrap up my case studies, is then we were working with Kaiser on vaccine hesitancy. We'd completed the first ever fully inclusive clinical trial, large population clinical trial in America, using insights from the census to meet people of color in moments of need around COVID. We had over 2,000 single moms sign up for a 2,500 person survey. And I mean, a 2,500 person survey to get their blood drawn and tested in New Orleans using this moment-based approach. And as we were focusing on people, as we were doing then moving to vaccine hesitancy, we were reading, this was in January of this year, we were reading all the New York Times pieces and everything saying, yeah, Blacks are really hesitant. It's Tuskegee. It's all of these things. And we were looking at our data as we were engaging, and we were saying, we don't see hesitancy. We're seeing behavior that indicates a lack of interest, some access, but we're not seeing hesitancy so much. And what's really interesting is there's such this huge age difference between likely races and how we're engaging this. What's going on? So we looked at census data. And here's the graph. No one at the CDC or HHS knew this. January and February. This is 60% of the US population is white. 76% of those eligible for the first 100 million doses were white. When you looked through the first quarter of this year at vaccination rates, Blacks and Hispanics were actually getting vaccinated at rates greater than their share of the eligible population. All the stories about blocks to access were true. They would wait. I mean, it's a fun little frustrating exercise. Read all the New York Times, Washington Post pieces about hesitancy during that area. They take population level data, they then apply it to vaccine rates, and they find some case study of someone who waited on the phone for 3 hours before getting vaccinated. People were doing that. That was wrong. That was a huge barrier, but they were overcoming it. And what was keeping them from being vaccinated at rates equal to their population was our policy. And so as we shared this with the White House, ultimately then in March, Biden change the policy to remove the age restriction. And kind of, I've gone 5 minutes over my total. So with that, I will pause and look forward to the conversation that follows.
Fantastic, Eric. Thank you for sharing with us. Greatly appreciate it. I do have some folks who posted questions in chat. If you have other questions, feel free to put them into chat or use the reactions section of Zoom, which is on your far right-hand side at the bottom, to raise your hand and I'll call on you. Let's see here. The first person that was posting was Ben. Ben, do you have thoughts, comments, observations about what you just heard?
No, I very much enjoyed it, and I think the issue that I was posting about was we don't. I agree that we don't often allow the data to speak for itself. We're seeking argument instead of the story that the data can tell itself, and at least let the data tell its story first before we try to draw inference and give guidance to that story, which we often tend to do. And the other point was that the weak signals often are some of the more interesting insights that we bring forward. And so that those were just two thoughts that came to mind as you were talking. Very, very nicely done. And also, as Vince says as well, it's very scary as well. How we purpose this activity towards the, you use the term directing people. I mean, patterns of influencing, patterns of persuasion, all of that direction takes many forms. And also its exercise and purpose can be scary too for that capability.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And on that last point, just quickly, because this is obviously, whenever we talk about big data and these tools and everything, there is a great deal of power and influence there. And there's two things. One, my sense, look, as was a history major, one of my majors in college, and humanity never develops really powerful things and then decides not to use it. I don't think there is a way to put this back in the box. And that's why the way we understand and create data is so important. A rifle and a spade can both be used to kill someone or to dig a furrow that grows food for hungry people. One is much more likely to be used for that purpose than for each purpose than the other. And so that's where I think we are with data right now. There is no way to regulate this. I can tell you, working in it, the regulators can never catch up with the process. They don't understand it well enough. So the solution to me is we have to build the better pathways that make it much more likely people have a bunch of spades. They still might go whacking each other, and someone might organize a bunch of them to storm and kill. I mean, machetes were used to massacre folks, but it's a lot harder to do it with machetes than what the Taliban now have.
Thanks, Eric. Let's hear from Vint next. We heard kind of an opening in Ben's question to Vint's commentary. Vint?
Thanks very much, Kevin, and thank you, Eric. I admit, as I listened to what you were saying, the ability to extract insight was impressive, and then it got scary because it's obviously a little bit like using an adenovirus to inject some kind of DNA or mRNA into your cell. I mean, that's the most intimate thing you can imagine, and your ability to inject intellectual virus into people's brains was simultaneously impressive and a little scary. But I also believe that there is an evolutionary component to this. If you think a little bit about how you get people's attention, warnings are, we've evolved to respond to warnings because if you didn't respond, you probably died and didn't contribute to the gene pool anymore. So it's a bear. And run like hell is the correct response, as opposed to, gee, I wonder what species that bear is, and I wonder how many of them there are in the forest. And gosh, that's a really interesting kind of color of fur. And oops, I've just been eaten. So I suspect that your left and right diagrams showing kind of scary warning kinds of things on the left side, and then the more positive things on the other side, are exercising that same mechanism. That attention getting is evolutionarily life-saving. So I'd be interested to know whether you agree with that rather simple-minded analysis.
I do, and in that, and I've used some of that. I tended to use saber-toothed tiger in mine, but as you said it, I realized, that we need to use wolves, because this is the perfect example. When we went from "that's a wolf, get away" to why is that wolf hanging around in just the puppies? Maybe then we got dogs, and evolutionarily, yeah, huge step forward of the people that were able to see the benefit, not just do the fear factor, but the societies that shifted. They created huge competitive and other advantages in the space. So maybe that's kind of the perfect analogy of, yes, we are hardwired in one way, and we are hardwired and allowed to move beyond it.
If Kevin will permit me, could you tell us what data you use to detect the loss of smell syndrome? How did you discover that?
So,
granted.
in very short, our system, we use a human companion in the loop type of approach. So we let the AI systems that exist run a lot of it, like Google ad programs and a bunch of other overlays, go and find stuff and engage. And after we built these models, we kept seeing, but way down, this is the human part right now, at least, way down, and it just stepped out at us. We'd see, hey, you know what else comes up here? It was like 200 on the list. Loss of smell in this angle. But then we saw it in another group that wasn't all related, that this is something they're interested in too. And these were not things that the AI systems were suggesting you should engage on. They weren't strong enough yet. There was too much noise in the data. But then we saw it like 5 times, and it was such a weird thing to see that we're like, that's weird. I wonder why that is. And all we did was look. And this is why when I talk about our work, and to Ben's point, it's the things that are missing, it's the holes in the data that drives everything we do. Like, why is that? Let's look at loss of smell. And that was the graph. And you look at loss of smell interest, that was interest in America. As soon as you look at that, it was like, oh my goodness. And then we started searching. And this was February or something. And we found 2 blog posts of ER type doctors that were working early COVID cases. We had several of them into like chats. Has anyone else noticed half of my patients are reporting amnesia? Has anyone else seen this? Well, it was COVID in February, March. Oh yeah, maybe, we saw like 2 yeses, but that wasn't getting into anything. But once we knew where to look, it quickly became, and then we do loss of smell. You run that analysis. And you say, what's related to loss of smell? Well, loss of taste. Loss of taste wasn't even showing up. It was so diluted. But there's another graph, like it follows the exact same path. So it's like, again, it's correlative, maybe. And this was part of our approach too. I'm like, you know what? I don't care. We're putting in the model, and suddenly our model gets a lot better. And we started kind of saying, hey, people need to aware about it, Oscar, et cetera. Government, you need to be aware.
Eric, as a chef, that is when COVID started to kick in, that was my greatest concern in quality of life, was loss of taste and smell. I said, that's why I've got to stay isolated, because that's going to decrease my quality of life way too much. Right.
Yep.
I saw Mario walking the streets of someplace, but he had some comments in chat, and we'd be delighted to have you join. Mario.
Greetings from Budapest.
Oh, wow.
Excellent.
I'm concerned about Minority Report scenarios. We're seeing more and more chatbots becoming Turing and passing some of AGI's Turing tests. And I'm wondering whether there'll soon be breaking ASI, super intelligence. And my concern is humans in the loop, right? BCIs and a brain computer interface should be around, but open water is still not that advanced. And I think humans are going to be left as great pets if we are going to go through this minority report scenario, which they can capture data much better than we can, let alone process, let alone act on. And we're talking about UK, Italy already deploying this to reduce crime with their surveillance state, and let alone China. But still, with China's credit system, they couldn't stop COVID. Even though they can see somebody jaywalking, they have the data of jaywalkers, but they don't have the data of COVID. So I'm wondering whether this is a little bit, where's the human in the loop and how can we control this Pandora box?
Yeah. Well, I'd offer back, and obviously others can weigh in on this, but to me, there's two aspects. You started on like the China example is great. They intentionally didn't collect a lot of that data. They didn't want to go deep because they didn't want to know some of those things. And so the data we collect is important. To me, this goes with bots and everything back to the spade versus rifle example. If we were training bots, if the way that bots faked they were human on the fake side was to be really nice to people, to be supportive, to be encouraging, to meet needs. Oh, hey, I'm going to tell you about this thing you need to get this service to help with your kid. Have you seen this set of resources? They still might, if that's how we were able to tell whether they were gaming or not, can they beat us on that? There's still something a little scary about them being able to beat us, but the outcome is very, very different in that application. And even again, governments are using this for crime. What are they looking for though? In Minority Report, and the way we often approach it, because it's how we collect data, it's the same with opioids. What's the bad thing the person did? I think now looking to InsurTech, hey, how do we know someone? How do we prevent crime? Crime can be prevented by putting more cops on the street and trying to arrest people, or crime can be prevented by understanding the mechanisms that create an environment that makes certain communities more likely to experience it, that even put people into a place where they're more likely to do it. And that doesn't mean you lock them away. Much of crime goes back to this inequality, injustice is inefficient. There are ways to use bots to solve for those things. That doesn't get at the most fundamental question of, are we being outpaced by AI? I would be interested if anyone could say this 150 years from now, the answer will be no, that we will stop this somehow. So to me, the question is, how do we shape that world in the way that we want it to be? How do we build AIs that are serving us and serving what we truly value better, rather than risking a space where, it's whatever the Terminator net thing was, or China, which is really scary with their social engineering. Skynet, thank you.
And Terry, I may pronounce your last name wrong, but Anne, you had some comments. We would be glad to have you join us. Okay, let's move on to Doug. You had a fairly well-shaped post inside chat, Doug.
Yeah, and so Eric, first of all, I really appreciate your talk. I'm a big believer in data and how to use data to shape a more a compassionate world. Whenever I have strong opinions sometimes on things, but one question I ask myself is, how can I make my rhetoric more have our country more like Switzerland and less like Syria? Because Switzerland has a lot of different languages, different people group. And, I guess the question is how can we, even though we have strong opinions, have as more people-centered internet, where we have this third way of where we're not just yelling at each other. So, I appreciate your comments, and I think this is going to be the struggle we have. There was a Senate hearing on algorithms and amplification, and talking about the Chinese model and the US model, Western world model, and how we need to have a third way of how we interact with data, and not just make everyone angry or mind control and so forth. So it's going to be a challenge. I mean, we can go in either direction, and both dystopia directions are bad.
Well, let me on that one, I'll share one more case study that's a really good, hopefully give people hope. One, if I was going to say one answer to that, I'd say if you work with a nonprofit, make sure they are doing Google grants. Our nonprofit Public Democracy America has a program to totally help run and set those up. And this goes back to data creation. Within our system, Google will give $10,000 a month free to any 501c3 for $10,000 in ads free. You have to know how to use it well.
Mhm.
And here's the key, like for all we blame data, there's no margin in a free ad. You want to know why what should be billions of dollars of free ads are not being used? Because the consultants that would have to run them cannot make their, the normal margin right now in a digital ad is 30 to 40%, which is like the correct. The problems with this system are not just data, it's not just Facebook, it's all the things that have glommed on top of it. But Google grants, anyone can do that. That is meant because Google understands search is being skewed, and it wants things that exist to serve people to create more data to teach its systems off of. Now, my case study in February of this year, the top referred keyword for people searching in America in Spanish for get the vaccine was Sputnik, which shows how effective the Russians are at this. Mm-hmm. Right now, 25% of all of RT's traffic is in Spanish. Last summer, they had a 10% audience overlap with Univision. The Russians are very good at this, but that couldn't happen if our side didn't suck so bad. Like, they don't go to Sputnik about the vaccine because there are better answers out there for Spanish-speaking people in America. The public health did a lot of, oh, you know what? We need to do our thing for brown people. Let's put the E in and translate the 20-page PDF that was created for educated white people into Spanish, and now we've done our job. Let's communicate with them with everything they need to know. Don't bother listening to what they're actually asking and answering questions. Let's tell them what they need to know. Like, people-centered internet, I've got a good audience for my rants, but like, because make it about them and we can answer. So we saw that, we knew that. We saw one of the big holes was actually right now in America, 4 in 10 Hispanic Americans are evangelical. Most people on the coast don't think that, don't know that. Like, oh, they're all Catholics. No, they're really moving heavily. There was nothing we could find online for Protestant Christians about the vaccine. There was nothing for pro-life Christians because public health gets really, we don't want to tell them Moderna and Pfizer are fine because they don't use the same stem cells that were taken, that people have abortion, because we don't want to say there's a better and worse there. So we don't communicate at all. All those questions were out there. We created a website. I can't do my Spanish well, but we created a website for in Spanish, all by Spanish-speaking people. It was built by them for Christians, mostly Protestant Christians, just answering all the questions we could find. This website starts dominating. We're ahead of CDC in a lot of our communities. What does the Bible say about the vaccine? What Christian leaders say, all this stuff. And then something fascinating happens. Google says, you know what? We're running these optimizing programs. We decided to start showing your ad to people searching for Sputnik vacuna. We don't mention Sputnik anywhere on our website. There's nothing in an ad that mentions Sputnik or the Russians. The AI figured out and decided to show it. And because we've been paying attention earlier, normally what you do in these things, you're like, oh, that's not what I want. Repress, don't run to them. We're like, ah! Google's putting us in front of Sputnik vacuna. We know what that's doing. Yes, go, 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 go. we're now winning 70%. 70% of the people in America who are Spanish speaking looking for Sputnik are getting our ad, our top of the page for them, either the content or the ad is, what do Christians need to know about the vaccine? And we've got a 30% click-through rate. All of this came together in the back end. I can't tell you exactly how that algorithm did it, but it did it because it understood those people, and it did it to people-centered internet, how it's missing. Those people didn't want to go to Sputnik. They were actually looking for Sputnik, but it was only because they hadn't found other answers before. They were not Sputnik people. It's the same going back to my beginning. People are not unlikely to vote. They've never been given a good reason to vote. And if we treat them all the same way, if we only see those people as Sputnik people, we will never be able to help them. They were not looking for Sputnik. We did not, and this is maybe a little more hopeful, we didn't go out to say, I'm going to change them on Sputnik. I'm going to influence them on Sputnik. I'm going to go and do this. We just said, man, they shouldn't be there. We know they don't want to be there because they leave all the time. Let's give them something better. And when we did, not only did we start getting a lot of engagement with that better, but they stopped going as much to the bad thing. And it was just by focusing on them.
So Eric, we're at the point where we thank everyone who wanted to stay for the first hour. We're about to go into the optional second half hour of questions. And, so for those of you who need to depart, we thank you. We remind you that this coming week on Wednesday, we have the Marconi session. Casey Komlowski has sent out a meeting notice and Vint put into chat how to sign up for that, 11 o'clock on Wednesday, the 15th. At noon, we have a joint call with the Atlantic Council and with PCI about the results of the Geotech Commission report. And in 2 weeks from today, we'll have Dr. Ted Zoller join us on entrepreneurship and funding networks. So great discussion so far. For those of you who want to stay with us, please do. And for those of you who have to depart, we're grateful that you are with us for the first hour. Okay, let's see. Anne, I'm going to go back to you. Did you have, if you come off mute, we could work with your question or your commentary. It looks like Anne has stepped away. Diane, are you still with us? No, I think Diane has dropped. Mario, you had some additional comments after your last question, so please rejoin the thread.
Well, regards to crime prevention, we have low-tech solutions. Just like to share this worthy of the World Economic Forum Foundation Prize, a reduced recidivism of crime in 75%, just by basically low demeanor crimes, giving them alternative sentences so they could develop a profession and re-engage into work and refacilitate their entry into community, and actually creating a piggy bank so that they don't leave penniless out of the sentence. So this is low tech. I mean, reducing crime, reducing is low tech. Concerns are human out of the loop on this GPT-3 and GPT-4. I'm working with, playing with GPT-3, and I'm surprised the amount of answers they give. It's pretty amazing, close to AGI. And I'm hearing the GPT-4 will be 500 times more powerful than GPT-3. And we're not even close to having a brain-computer interface, which would be a leash for this Pandora box. So I'm looking, what are the alternatives? Because the best or the brightest, like Elon Musk say, we need to move slowly, because these kind of things, once you open the can of worms, and it can't really regulate China. So if the US doesn't do it, China will. So this conundrum, I'm really not sure if this is the place, since it's people-centered internet, maybe this is some debate we should really look into. How is this going to play about?
Thanks, Mario. Eric, any thoughts, comments?
Oh, it's I think looking to the insurtech space is one possible solution. I'm not an expert in that. It's kind of like, hey, I learned that term, but it's a valuable model. Some of what's happened with BlackRock as well, where a B Corp, this idea of how you build and understand value in things, I mean, Mario, you said it all. If we try to stop, China's going to keep going. Like, their idea of how this happens makes a lot of our 1980s dystopian movies look like, The Wizard of Oz and the like. And so we can't let that happen. We can't let this just continue as pure, even if we could stop China, letting just Facebook keep selling eyeballs, like we see how that breaks. So it again, to me, feels like we have to build something better and that will outcompete. And we have to get the rich and powerful on our side. Like, that's going to be the solution. We have to find a way for the people with tons of money to see how much better, like, and with crime, if you make it so that a hedge fund is able to understand how it could get this fraction of a difference by reducing crime, and this is kind of the insurtech piece, instead of looking at insurance as what people pay in and damages paid out, we can find things now that tell State Farm, hey, if you build that Head Start program, in 5-10 years, your actuary table can be adjusted so you are paying out much lower on the damages thing.
Yeah.
Government's not going to do that, but people with more money than anybody should. I mean, BlackRock is the 5th largest economy in the world right now. Those people can do it in a second.
Yeah. So I might suggest that the chart that you showed about, attention versus engagement is that, there has to be an economic incentive to start to build engagement algorithms as opposed to attention algorithms. And, the point there is the attention algorithms have a tendency to be lower level amygdala punching bags, right? Just punch at my, lower level consciousness, right? To, provoke me into, staying with whatever it is that I'm looking at, or to take me down, a particular path. And, human consciousness has a lot more, right, sophistication than that. We just don't have the people building systems that are sufficiently biomimicry based, right, of who we are yet. Okay, that's a yet, right? I mean, there will be economic incentive to get there, I think. And what China's doing, we're going to do in terms of private employment situations. Those are going to be the places where we, see a lot of, what does it mean to be a citizen of a company, right? And to what degree do we want to interfere and, look at those situations? Because that's where it's going to, happen, in my opinion. Eric.
Well, and your citizen example is really important. I mean, we're called public democracy for a reason. That
100%.
That democracy, I mean, when we're looking for examples and systems, democracy is an example at a 200 years ago level of a lot of what we're talking about. The idea is, how do you align power and control best with the people's interest? Yeah. We know democracy can become, populism and demagoguing, and the mob can become a threat. And so our founders, tried to create some checks against that, but they created a system where the powerful derive their power from the people as the best way to align those interests. And data data that allows for that same mechanism. And so even looking through history of how did we make those changes from kings and authoritarian to democracy.
It's the more granular version of representation. You know, we say it's a representative democracy, right? And so representation can become data. Lynn Wells, you have your hand up.
Yes, sir. So for Eric, the question is, in a different project, I've been wrestling with the social media companies about trying to understand how to track sentiments. For example, there's some group of people, not individuals, pro or con a particular policy or something like this. And it runs afoul occasionally of the use case rules that say you can't either track individuals or track political sentiments or track medical situations or things like that. And I'm just wondering, how is this something you've come across in your research, or you do something differently that you never engage this?
The social media companies have created walled gardens of data to ensure they monopolize and own their people. Like Apple does the same thing. You are going to come into, it is going to be challenging to work with them to serve their people, because it is not in their interests, as they have set up their model to do for the most part, which kind of creates all the big, we talked about data as an abundance source. It's been monopolized by, you know, Google, Facebook, Twitter, all these others, and Apple. Like Apple's whole thing with all of its privacy language, it's like they're now the pimp. Like it's like, yes, I will protect you, but I own you. And all of I'm going to take 30% of everybody that tries to sell you something. Like all these models are the same. They use different rhetoric to describe them. And they are deeply inefficient because they're taking this abundance-based resource and trying to make it scarce. So having said that, the two things that I see are, one, they can't, their system has to allow for what you have said to be able to sell you well. And so the data exists, they try to hide it, or they try to make it very challenging for others to access. And so one is just figure out their system, but they're big. They can't keep track of all their own rules. Most of what they're creating is a CYA to prevent a big PR problem. There are holes in their systems. Like right now, they have to allow advertisers to access some of this stuff to sell their product, which is the people they think that they own. And so there are different ways, if you understand how they're doing it, to cobble together their APIs to gain some of those insights. The other way is create systems outside, work with the broader marketplace. Is more, social media is so attention driven. It really isn't meeting a lot of needs. If you want to understand sentiments, I would say much more simple to do it outside of social media. That's most of where we work. And in the general marketplace with anonymized data sets, even totally PII free, you can gain much greater understandings of people, what they need, what they want, Tomarios and others, risks and threats now. So all this privacy stuff to me is a bit of a joke, because like, think of my Monsanto example. I used no PII with that. I can run that in Europe, GDRP compliant. And I knew a hell of a lot more about anybody in that system than I would have with PII. But that's also, again, China knows that, the Russians know that, the white nationalist Stormfront is recruiting kids all the time because of that. And so again, how are we going to build better systems? So you could either become an expert on Facebook and Twitter and find ways they allow you to accomplish what you say with, or you can do it outside of them.
Yeah, I'll get back to you and talk about this later. But we have the additional problem is that George Mason, of course, is an academic institution. So it's got its own bureaucracy that's incredibly risk averse in this kind of space. Right.
Yeah.
And so I'll talk to you later offline, but thank you very much. It's a wonderful talk. Thank you.
But there's lots of data exhaust, right? That's revealed preference data. And if you want to just study, if you just want to look up, you can do a Wikipedia search of revealed preference, which are data flows, versus stated preference surveys and so on and so forth. You'll find that there's a lot of revealed preference data that's readily available, doesn't violate anybody's privacy.
Yep.
Just like you're saying, Eric.
And the simplest and most infuriating rule on all this, how you categorize data so much defines it. And this is where the academics can drive me crazy of like, so you're not allowed to have race data in a lot of this stuff. If you called it Black people, well, it's a violation of terms of service. If you call it data on propensity of zip code inherent or any other category, it's allowed. And that's where these exhaust things will happen a lot. And again, why race isn't the best thing. Race matters, but like we need to get past some of these old categories, but like going into these deeper data sets, you can define them in ways to use them much more effectively.
Yeah, I mean, just as an aside, one of the reasons that we don't get a lot of innovation in banking is that there's so many guardrails up against data use in banking that you can't actually hear the marketplace, right?
Yep.
And, therefore, it's easier to import m-commerce from, third world applications that have grown up where there are no banks, right? Where Coco is.
Yep.
Coco, I'm glad to see you. How are you?
Yep. Yep.
You turned on your camera. Do you have some thoughts to share with us? Turn on your mic, buddy. No, maybe not.
I'm just fixing my sound.
Well, we're glad to have you with us. What do you think about Eric's talk today? Oh, he had some difficulty with feedback. We can't hear you. Anyway, point taken.
Well, and I mean, sorry, is there another question out there?
No, if you have another thought, we're coming up
I
to the
can
top of the
share,
hour.
yeah, we're coming up, maybe one final kind of useful story, and it goes to the academics and even to the banking piece, was so the NIH did a study comparison of all the peer-reviewed published literature on studies it had funded around clinical trials. And they looked only at those that in their publication claimed credit for effectively recruiting African Americans. Mm-hmm. So the ones that were being peer-reviewed, published for doing a good job and lifted up as examples. The average rate of participation versus population was 1/3 of the community. So these groups being lifted up were underrepresented by 2/3. The best that they found was 50% underrepresentation. This was in all of their studies. And so when we were doing our COVID clinical trials, we went in and we got brought in last minute because there was this rush. They couldn't use the normal recruiting groups. And I naively thought, hey, this is science. Therefore, like you needed a sample. And we came in and we told the science, like, we're looking, I think the demand's there. We'll get you a representative sample. And all this time they laughed. It was like this virtual pat on the head. They said, that's really sweet. We know you're a B Corp and what you were doing is census. We want this to be as representative as possible, but please don't mess up the study. Like, it's impossible. Black people don't show up. And so we got to get this done. Don't wreck the study by trying to make it too representative. And we're like, and I told I got, you can see I'm white, but I was like, that really pissed me off. And so I thought, guys, we are going to do this. And we went in and we exceeded Black and Hispanic participation in New Orleans in a week and a half on a population level study that was set up in 2 weeks. And we did it by listening. We did it we didn't use the systems and best practices that had been established because those didn't work. But this crazy, so we represent we get a fully inclusive study. Ochsner has these huge breakthroughs in the first big study publishing asymptomatic and getting census on how that was spreading in COVID back in the summer, et cetera. And we're talking to it's going to Lancet and CDC for peer review 2 months later. And the peer review people, I don't do academics, our reviewers said, oh, we have really serious problems. You did not use a randomized study. This cannot be represented. Randomization is the best way to ensure a fully representative set. I'm like, randomization guarantees. If we created a stratified randomized study, because if I do just pure randomization, I know I will not be representative and inclusive. And that, why didn't you use the mailers? Why didn't you use the address-based thing that is our best practice? It's because when you send people a mailer 2 months before the study and say, you get a chance to call in and sign up and we'll send you the Outlook calendar invite, you know who that guarantees will not participate? Poor Black women who are working 2 jobs and cannot commit 2 months ahead to participation. We got those single moms. Going back to the opportunity zones work and the census work, the bulk of the single moms that signed up the night before the study. They were not looking for, how do I join an NIH-sponsored study? They were looking for, how do I help my kids stay safe? How do I help my kids keep up when they're in daycare all day? And they are not seeing options. And in that moment at 11:30 at night, we gave them an ad that said, hey, we know you're scared. I mean, say all this, but it's basically communicated. We know you're scared. You can sign up right now for a free study that'll tell you, did you have COVID? Do you have COVID? And you can do it tomorrow or anytime that you want. And those women jumped at that. And then instead of saying, and here's our long website that you have to answer this, we gave them something that optimized to mobile. We moved them into text. And whenever a reminder came up, we said, and we know you're busy. If you can't make this appointment, just reschedule. Because the emotional load for someone who the kid's yelling and, oh, there's an option for them to reschedule. They have to call and speak to someone and say, I promised I'd be there and I can't. You know what a lot of them do? They don't call and then they don't show up. And then we say, you can't count on those people to show up. When you give them the chance that doesn't have that emotional load, 2/3 of our African-American participants rescheduled their appointment. The ones that came on a rescheduled appointment. Lancet rejected our paper because it was not a randomized trial. CDC, we got it published in CDC, we got it other things. This is part of the challenge we face, but it again was like, let's learn from the people. Let's look at systems that are broken. We talked about attention. There are lots of bad ways of collecting data, and that's what we need to overcome.
Well, we want to thank you for being with us today, Eric. A couple of questions. One is, will you be willing to share the charts that you presented today with us?
Yeah, I will.
Okay.
I will send that to you, Kevin. I'll create a PDF and all. I'll double check. I think pretty much all of those are also fine. I don't have any issues on publication.
Second is, as we were discussing before I turned the recording on, we record this just inside of our community. So if in the future we want to share this inside of the PCI community, is it okay to, share this recording based on what we discussed today?
Yes. And and the way the conversation went, I think that this will be fine. And if there's anything you want to go outside, happy to.
Yeah, if we decide that there's something beyond the community, we will be back in touch with you. I mean, it was a good discussion, and you shared generously, so thank you for that. And I know that there are some people who are going to be back in touch with you. Benita, you will have the last question. You're raising.
Well, I actually want to share this with my students. I teach at Santa Clara University, and the graduate engineering program and gender and engineering. And of course, and I teach the difference between the individualistic way of thinking and the more relational way of thinking. And it's just so beautiful, such a live example of different approach. And so Kevin, should I get in touch with you about being
Yes,
able
please
to?
do.
Okay.
And I'll work with Chris and Casey, to get you hooked up. Eric, do you have any objections to Benita using it in that context?
I have no objections, and Benita, kind of part of my, if you were at the very beginning, part of my kind of calling of industry. I'd also be happy to talk if you need to, someone for a class. That's kind of the one group I try to carve out the most time for
Great.
students.
Okay, and also I have a friend, a colleague who is working on reducing, eliminating violence in Chicago. So are you up for those kinds of projects?
Yeah, and I mean, to talk to people, that's what we exist to do, is to
I would
support
think so.
folks trying to, those better angels in our communities. So
Okay,
happy to have any conversations follow up.
thank you.
Thank you. And Eric, thanks for being with us today. You made some, clearly you made some friends, all right? Made some connections, and I'm sure that puts a smile on your face. So
Yeah.
thank you so much. And you have the thanks from the PCI community for joining us today. Cheers.
Thank you all, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye-bye.